the Congress of South African Trade Unions is meeting in Johannesburg to discuss collective bargaining. Amongst other issues to be discussed is, of course, also the incomes policy in South Africa's labour market. The Union Federation considers this to be one of the critical areas of what it has dubbed the second phase for radical economic transformation. Joining me now from that conference on the line is Sdumo Dlamini. He is the Cosatu President. Mr. Dlamini, thank you so much and welcome to Beyond Markets. Of course, one of the key issues at your conference is the question of collective bargaining. Now, collective bargaining has come under quite a lot of pressure, particularly in the mining sector, as smaller unions edge their way in, and of course they are not accommodated under the current system. We also know that the Free Market Foundation is questioning the whole, the implications of collective bargaining on smaller unions and also on smaller companies. How does Cosatu plan to position the issue of collective bargaining in this conference, and is it something that you're going to remain, committed to going forward?
Thank you very much, Karima, and good evening to yourself and the viewers of CNBCA. We are inspired by our 11th National Congress, which took place last year, and instructed us to convene a collective bargaining campaigns and organizing conference in which we should put at the center issues of workers' vulnerability, issues of collective bargaining, issues of going back to basics, to what Cosatu used to be before the advent of our democratic dispensation, but also how we're fitting into the new challenges facing the labor market today, including the proliferation of smaller unions and the dismantling and the weakening of centralized bargaining in our country, as we have envisaged in the different areas where the most vulnerable, the most downtrodden are not able to access collective bargaining. We are here in this conference driven by that, but also that the African National Congress went into its own conference last year and endorsed a program on the radical transformation for the economic transformation in the second phase of our democracy, and saying how are we fitting ourselves to that particular program. We're calling it the Lula moment, but it's just a terminology, not necessarily defining exactly what we are doing, but making the point that this time around, workers in South Africa, workers, the unemployed, the vulnerable need to be put at the center of this change, this radical change that must happen in our country.
But now, Mr. Dlamini, that is all well and good, but if one takes, for example, the mining sector, you have a situation where your largest affiliate, the National Union of Mine Workers, have lost its footing in, for example, the platinum sector. You have a smaller union, AMCU, that have now managed to edge its way in, and they represent, or at least they claim to represent, the majority of workers, and you don't have collective bargaining in that sector. We've seen with the closures of mines at Lonmin, at Amplatz and so on, that collective bargaining locks out a key player out of the process, in this case AMCU. How does collective bargaining bring workers on board, particularly workers who are not covered by the threshold in terms of the current legislation?
Centralized bargaining is important for all the workers, for solidarity purposes, but for their collective bargaining power itself. It doesn't work or help that workers can be outside the processes of centralized bargaining. What becomes a problem in this instance, and the example you put in, is that you would have the proliferation of smaller unions who would use violence and under-tactics to get recognition in the place where there are existing unions which have duly followed procedures to attain organizational rights and being recognized in those areas. We cannot compare that with the problem. But the issue here is that having done a thorough introspection, both in NUM and Cosatu in general and its unions, we appreciate the reality of a changing labor market space where we have young workers who are largely under the serious squeeze economically, who are unemployed, who are skilled, having gone to school, but they cannot access proper channels of communicating and being employed to earn a living. That is the challenge that we are dealing with in this particular conference. And we know at the end of this conference, Cosatu unions are more clearer on how we're going to face and deal with the challenge of these workers and those who are unemployed, women and the youth of our country.
Now, the other issue that is also being dealt with at this conference is, of course, the question of incomes policy. Now, Cosatu has historically highlighted the kinds of inequalities we have in the labor market, with top executives earning very, very big salaries and, of course, lower-end workers and the gap in between. Take us through some of the issues that you're putting on the table to try and close that gap when it comes to incomes policies.
There are basically three areas. The first one being that of the national minimum wage, which has got to be canvassed with government, canvassed with civil society, with the ANC and other formations in our country, so that we have at least a common benchmark where if people go to negotiations, they are saying we're starting from here. We should agree on a national minimum wage policy in this country. Secondly, we should be able to agree to a wage policy, a social wage policy, which protects those who are unable to be employed but can be able to access support or subsidization by the state. We should drum up what the thing is going to be. And also, lastly, the social protection of the unemployed in our country. Those who cannot still afford to get a job, what is it as a country we're going to do to ensure that they are indeed feeling that there is change in this country? It's not like it has been during the apartheid era, that their situation remains the same.
Now, of course, all of this happens within the context that you've sketched about the need for a radical shift in the economy and economic policy. But the reality of the situation, Mr. Dlamini, is that the ANC and the government has accepted the National Development Plan as the cornerstone and overarching plan and vision for the coming decades in the country. Many people have argued that this plan is neither radical nor is it genuinely transformative. In fact, one of your largest affiliates, the NUMSA, the workers union organizing automotive workers, have said that the NDP is in fact a cut and paste job from the opposition Democratic Alliance. You serve on the ANC's executive, you are Cosatu's president. How are you going to engineer this radical transformation, given the fact that Cabinet is now committed not just to the NDP in terms of its broad vision, but actual implementation?
Yes, Karima, our understanding is that the NDP is up for discussion by society. Cosatu is also engaged in that particular scrutiny and the discussion on where is this NDP. At the end of our internal discussion, and definitely at our forthcoming Central Executive Committee, we shall pronounce on what is the Cosatu's position. Currently, it's a debate that is still happening in affiliates. But if it is indeed a policy or a document that is for public speaking, for public scrutiny, we should accept that we have not yet agreed on this policy. We are criticizing it, and indeed Cosatu must be very critical of this policy. That is what is happening. And if you then looking into those of us who are sitting in the ANC NEC, it is our duty sitting there to influence using the strategies, the tactics, the beliefs from also the labor movement to express a view on how workers view the NDP, which will help enrich the debate in the ANC about the NDP.
Okay, that's where we will have to leave it. Of course, Cosatu President Sdumo Dlamini discussing the Union Federation's conference on collective bargaining.